facilitating coordination among Metro's Atlanta transit operators on issues of policy, planning, and service delivery, as well as funding and financing transit infrastructure and operations. In his role as the Chief Planning Officer, Cain leads development of the ATL's Regional Transit Plan, Regional Fare Policy, and regional coordination on transit technology issues. Prior to joining the ATL, Cain spent 20 years at the Atlanta Regional Commission, where he led numerous multimodal planning and policy initiatives, including bicycle and pedestrian planning, transit planning, human service transportation, transportation demand management, and long-range comprehensive regional visioning. So I'm not sure if Cain was really good at doing a lot of different things, or each division kicked him out to go to another one. Cain has served on the GTA board and the board of the Atlanta chapter of the Women's Transportation Seminar. In fact, I think you were a first to be a male on the WTS board. Is that correct? Excellent. He is a graduate of the Leadership APTA program and is a member of the APTA Racial Equity Commitment Working Group. Cain is a lifelong Georgian. He grew up on the coast in Liberty County and got his undergraduate degree in political science from Georgia Southern University, the original GSU. After college, he moved to Tallahassee to get his graduate degree in urban and regional planning from Florida State University. He now lives in the town of Newborn, Georgia, where he serves on the town council. So can we say hello to Cain? Okay, and our next panelist is Faye DeMassimo with the Chatham Area Transit Authority. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Faye for close to 20 years now, and tremendous professional, outstanding contributions to our field. Faye serves as the Executive Director, CEO of Chatham Area Transit, affectionately known as CAT. She has 40 years of experience with federal, regional, and local public entities, as well as the private sector in development, management, and delivery of multimodal transportation programs. She previously served for over 2 years as the Senior Advisor for Transportation and Infrastructure to Mayor John Cooper and Interim Director of the Metro Nashville Department of Transportation and Multimodal Infrastructure. Prior to Metro Nashville, she served with Deloitte Consulting as the City of Atlanta Renew Atlanta T-SPLOS General Manager, and prior to that was the Director of the Cobb County DOT. During her early part of her career with Lee Russell Council of Governments, she led transit service for a 2-county region, and later during her tenure at Cobb DOT, also had responsibility for the county transit operations. They converted to Cobb Link under your tenure? Very good. Faye holds 3 degrees from Auburn University, including, or Sue Ann. She holds 3 degrees from Auburn University, including a Bachelor of Science in Public Administration and Masters of Community Planning and Public Administration. Additionally, she is a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners. Faye has participated in numerous leadership programs and community organizations over the years, and presently serves on the Grays Reef National Marine Sanctuary Foundation Board of Trustees and is a member of the Rotary Club of Savannah. She has also been recognized with numerous awards, including most recently being named to the 2022 Engineering Georgia's 100 Most Influential Women. She and her husband Tom live in downtown Savannah. They have 3 sons, two granddaughters, as well as serving at the pleasure of 2 rescue dogs. Let's greet Faye. And our final esteemed panelist is Dr. Oliver Page, who was the Deputy Director at Augusta Transit. In his role, he's been primarily involved in transit service planning, performance measurement and operations, strengthening community and stakeholder relationships, and assessing how technology or clean energy can improve transit service delivery. Before joining Augusta Transit, Dr. Page served as the land use transportation planner with the MPO of the Augusta Regional Transportation Study, also known as ARTS. Dr. Page received a doctorate in civil engineering transportation focus from the University of South Florida in Tampa. And near and dear to my heart, while he was there, he was the president of the USF student chapter of ITE. So we have a great connection, and let's greet Dr. Page. So with that, what I'd like to do, if you have any burning questions about the electrification of their vehicles, some of the transit planning initiatives, recovering ridership from COVID, the panel is ready to respond and give you their insight for each of the systems they're involved with. And I told them that you guys weren't bashful, that we'd have plenty of questions. So I'll start off. Dr. Page, you let me know that you are applying for a low-no grant to purchase 5 battery electric vehicles. Can you give us a little detailed information with regards to the program and the application?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Augusta Transit, we are a small transit agency. In Augusta, it's about 3.5 hours from here. And this year, we are applying for the low emission, no emission FTA grant. And this is a grant where funds are given to purchase electric buses as well as the electrical infrastructure. And we have been privileged to work with the Center for Transportation and the Environment, a nonprofit based in Atlanta. And they have worked with many transit agencies that have been successful in getting funds for the purchase of electric buses. We are purchasing 5 buses. We are applying for a total of $7.2 million, of which 6.2 will come from the FTA, and the City of Augusta is matching with a 15% match of 1.1 million. We're very confident that we'll be successful. The announcement will be next month in August. One of the things that we have learned in this process, we started this process last year. We have invited 5 of the battery electric bus OEMs to come to Augusta to demonstrate their vehicles. They were put into regular service. We have Gillig, Proterra, BYD, Nova Bus, and New Flyer. They each came to Augusta. They lent us a bus for, say, 2 or 3 days. So the riders were able to familiarize themselves with electric buses. They were also taken to our workshop so we could get input from our mechanics as to how an electric bus works. So working with CTE, who work pro bono, they are a tremendous asset in this whole process of applying for electric buses. And one thing that we have learned, Augusta Transit, I don't think we could have done it without the input from CTE. Attending some of the low-no conferences, we have noticed that there hasn't been much response from Georgia-based transit agencies for these funds. I do know that MARTA has received funds, Chatham has received funds, and Macon have received funds from the low-no grant. So we're hoping that this year it's our turn to receive funds. And we've attended conferences to do with battery electric buses. And also, I've noticed that the attendance from Georgia transit agencies could have been better. I think this is a really good opportunity. There's lots of money for electric buses. The FTA wants to ensure that all states get a stab at getting funds for electric buses for their transit agencies. So as many of you are working with our consultants, I would, if you're working with the transit agency, encourage them to apply for these funds. We're not going to go 100% electric. We are also investing in some diesel buses because of some lessons learned. If you have a complete electric fleet and then you have a power outage, how do you charge your buses? And also in Georgia, I might add, Georgia Power, they will provide the infrastructure for the transit agency to have the charging stations for free. Georgia Power also has a grant to equip transit agencies with the required electrical infrastructure. So it's a win-win situation for any transit agency who apply for no grants at this point in time.
They understand that you're in the throes of electrification as well.
That's correct. So on Earth Day, we rolled out, our fixed route fleet is about 67 buses. So we rolled out just under 10% now of our fixed route fleet is electric buses. Rolled those out on Earth Day. They work on about a 2.5-hour charge, and we get about 220 miles out of each of those charges. So, and that works out very well with our route structure and so forth in terms of being able to run a complete route. We are typically running those buses right now on Abercorn and Waters routes. Those are some of our highest demand routes. And this is also two corridors where, and I'll go ahead and mention this, we are working with GDOT and the city of Savannah to install the equipment both on our buses and in the boxes to do traffic signal prioritization, transit signal prioritization in those corridors as well. And through our, we currently have what's called a COA TDP, Comprehensive Operational Analysis Transit Development Plan ongoing. And that work is very much a route analysis focused type work. And so we know how important it is with transit signal prioritization that the location of our stops in those corridors is going to require some really extensive analysis to make sure that that signal prioritization counts for the overall traffic flow in the corridor, but also for our transit buses as well.
Manjeet, what does MARTA have on the horizon?
Well, recently we've launched a pilot for our electric buses on routes 2 and 102. We held an event, and I recall it was also on Earth Day as well. And so MARTA's taking an incremental approach to exploring electrification of our fleet, and also willing to look at hydrogen in addition to electric battery buses. Of course, we have a very large fleet, and we have a labor force that we need to also be mindful of and how they learn the different propulsion systems and are ready to support the new fleet. So we are pursuing the grants carefully. We applied for a low-no grant for 25 electric buses in this last deadline of May. We are very excited about it, the opportunity to improve the environment and also to enhance equity, particularly as we look to where to deploy the electric buses in areas that may have experience more detrimental environmental impacts than, say, other areas of the community. But we are taking a more measured approach to deploying electric buses in our fleet. This is in contrast to, say, California, which is taking a very aggressive position on moving toward electrification with the air quality issues that exist there.
Thing I just thought about that I wanted to mention related to this too is, how many of you have been to Savannah and ridden the ferries before? I would assume a lot of folks. So one other thing that we're doing in this same space with our ferries is, you know, the four ladies are getting a little bit long in the tooth. And so we are starting to look at moving them into retirement over time. The first two replacements are going to be hybrid ferries. And so eventually all of our ferry services will in fact be performed through hybrid infrastructure.
So Cain, how does all this work with the regional zero emissions transition plan?
Good question. Before I answer that one, I would also just maybe put in a plug for ATL. In addition to being a regional planning authority, we also operate a commuter bus system for the metropolitan Atlanta region. 13 counties converging on port points in downtown, midtown, perimeter area, central Atlanta. We are also beginning to implement some electric vehicles. We operate over-the-road coaches, which are a little different than your standard 40-foot local bus. And it was just recently that a manufacturer was able to pass FTA testing on those over-the-road coaches. So we're taking delivery of 10 of them later this year or maybe early next, and we'll be operating them out of our south facility in Clayton County. We also were recipient of a Georgia Power Make Ready grant, like Oliver mentioned, that is helping us bring the electrical charging infrastructure to our South Ops facility. And we've been relying on electrical engineering at that facility from Atkins to support that work. So we're pretty excited about that. To Dan's question, the IIJA is, when it came into being, more or less set policy that as we proceed down this path of folks being able to apply for additional low-no grants in future years, are going to need a fleet transition plan in order to be able to be successful for that. And so in our regional coordination role, we're undertaking a regional zero-emission fleet transition planning effort that all of the operators in the region have agreed to participate in to some extent. And so we're pretty excited about kicking that off and thinking about how we can approach this transition from a coordinated regional perspective, so that we don't end up with a series of vehicles that have different charging infrastructure needs at different places, and all of us can sort of, I guess, take advantage of each other's capacity.
With the pandemic, it's my understanding that transit ridership took a little bit of a hit, and that so I'm curious as to the.
It's all good, Dan.
My bad.
Hey, Sean Green, pain in the ass. Actually, my question, it's been 12 years since I've bought buses, but a huge deal back then was being on the FTA list as Buy America certified. And, you know, it had to be like 2/3 of the value of the vehicle had to be American based. And I'm just wondering if that still applies with all of the battery technology and with all the electric vehicle rolling stock that you guys are doing en masse, or if there's exceptions to it. Just more curiosity than anything. Thank you.
So I will say that I'm not the one who buys the buses, so I don't know that I can fully answer that question, but my understanding that Buy America still does apply. Right, I'm not sure to what extent it does, but it's still an issue that vehicle manufacturers and purchasers have to deal with. Oliver, you are probably know more about this than I do.
Also, part of the loan application, the transit agency can name a partner. So with Augusta Transit, we have partnered with Gillig as our battery electric bus provider. And Gillig is an American transit bus, and they meet all the requirements. The buses also have to be Altoona tested. We did have a bus OEM that came to us, Nova. I think they're based in Canada, but now they are sort of trying to make a footprint in the US. But I think they're in the process of being Altoona tested as well. So we partnered with Gillig. I think there were some challenges with, we partnered with Gillig. We also partnered with ChargePoint as the OEM for making the charging equipment. We partnered with Georgia Power as the utility provider, and we partnered with the Center for Transportation and the Environment as our project manager. And the Low-No grant is an exception where you can name your partners before you are given the award, you see. So, and that is part of the application process, which FTA has blessed by, name your partners, and if successful, it makes it a lot easier to get the project rolling and you have been awarded.
This one's for, I'm Carla Pashedley. This one's for Faye. The rail that's in Savannah, the historic River Street, the rail there, and some of the tour buses that are for tourists, are those run by the city, or are those privately owned, or?
So there are the DOT system, which serves around Forsyth Park, the historic park, and then all the way down to River Street. There are 3 routes that are run there by a shuttle called DOT. That is a Chatham Area Transit Service. So we have right now 3 business lines. We run fixed, we run paratransit, and we run what I call specialty services. So the ferries and DOT fall into that specialty services. But there are other shuttles because if you've been to Savannah, you know there's shuttles and trolley-like looking. Now our dot service looks like a trolley, but there are shuttles that you kind of have to look and see what's what to know whether it's ours or whether it's a something that's been put under contract, specific group or use or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Troy with Arcadis. So question, you said the runtime for the buses are about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So
No,
For-
the charge time.
charge time, okay.
Charge time is 2.5 hours. The run is about 220 miles.
220 miles. Okay, so
It
for,
runs
this is
a
more
complete
kind of
route.
for MARTA then. I was like, for your day-to-day, would you need to get multiple buses to cover a whole day's route? And have you looked at that infrastructure act to have to expand your parking lots and your charging facilities and everything like that?
So for our our first BRT project, the first one in the Atlanta region, the Summerhill BRT, when we did the calculations, we determined that we need to do en route charging. So we couldn't just rely on it being charged at the depot. So we are providing that at the terminus station for the Summerhill BRT, and we expect to do that as we move into the Campbellton BRT. We just got that locally preferred alternative approved last week. Those will be electric buses as well. As the technology advances, then we certainly hope to not have to spend the money on the en route charging, but at least as early adopters that we are expecting to need that to ensure reliability. The Utah Transit Authority, where I came from before, MARTA, has a good electric bus demonstration on it. Also, it's route number 2 there, coincidentally, and they do en route charging as well.
That's what I was going to mention. You can have on-route charging. You can have induction system, as well as a high-speed pantograph. If we are successful with our application in future years, we would like to have induction charging at our main transfer facility. There's one or two OEMs that are involved in induction charging. And one of the things, as you're going through the process, having a consultant working with you is to do all the analysis to see which routes are favorable for electric buses. And that's one of the reasons why we invited the 5 OEMs to come to Augusta. They also had lots of telematics on the buses, which would show how the bus was being driven, how it was performing. And with electric buses, you can, the better mileage comes from not touching the brake. Once you take your foot off the accelerator, the bus naturally slows down. So the heavier the foot you have, the shorter the range. So, allowing our bus operators to experience that, they will then, as they do it more, the bus will have a better range because they would learn how to allow the bus to slow down itself with the foot off the brake rather than press the brake to slow down. So there is a learning curve, but having a consultant to do all the analyses as to which routes are best for electric buses, how many runs an electric bus can do, that's also part of the initial application that the FTA would like to see.
You can't stress enough the driver behavior and how that influences the range that you get. We were originally told that on a 2.5 hour charge, we would typically get about 170-mile range. We're getting 220, but we also spent months training extensively before we went into, a regular operations mode. And you can tell the difference, and you can tell the difference even now when we're still doing training with new operators and so forth, difference in the range from the guys that are really experienced and have been driving them now for months versus those that are just getting home with.
I was wondering if y'all had any new initiatives or projects related to safety and accessibility for your transit riders, like connected vehicle technology. I know MARTA is looking into replanning certain bus routes.
I can start with that. We have an initiative, the bus network redesign. So MARTA hasn't in several decades comprehensively re-examined its bus system, which is pretty large, of course, serving 2.1 million people in the Atlanta area. So it's well past time, particularly with what happened with the pandemic, that travel patterns changed considerably, and some of those travel patterns, as much as we hope to return back to normal, it's not coming back the way it once was. So we're working with Jared Walker and Associates and HNTB to re-examine our bus system and looking at the dynamic between, do we want to maximize coverage of our bus service, in which case you don't have the same level of frequency and the headways that go with that, or do we want to move toward more ridership, so there are fewer routes, but the routes that we have run more frequently. So that process is moving forward. We're going to have a series of workshops with the board leading to a mid-range policy decision. So the first in August, and then our committee meeting in September, followed by a board decision on this interim policy decision in September. And then we'll go forward and start to design the new network, and ultimately going through a pretty substantial public process, of course, and decisions to be made by the board. But we would then anticipate rolling out a new bus network in January of 2024. So it's a pretty extensive process to go through. The timing is going to work out well, as we also need to replace all of our bus signage. I was horrified when I came to this region and saw that it doesn't tell you what bus number is at the stop, and that's our entire system. So with the ATL's leadership, that bus signage redo is well underway, and MARTA is going to be in a good place to do that soon. But we really are taking a hard look at what we need to do to serve those who not only either because they need to or because they want to really rely on transit, but what can we do to who, it's going to keep happening the entire session, I guess. I think the audio system needs a drink too. So maybe the next time when he slips out to get yourself a drink, we can bring one back for the audio system. So we are hoping that we can design a system that more people are willing to use, and also can make connections to our rail system, which is fantastic, heavy rail system that can move a lot of people very quickly. But if it has to be if you're near it for your destination, your origin, so what can we do to make better connections to it, as well as to bring people to amenities in the region like Beltline that Sean and his team has done a great job designing the Beltline. How do we connect people to it, as well as to accommodate the growth that's coming in the region? Atlanta passed 500,000 people this last year, and the region is going to be adding, I think, another 2 million people over the next 20 years. And so what can we do to serve those and make that link between transit and land use? We're growing more smartly. I think that's it's telling me to shut up now.
What we are doing in Augusta to improve access, we are investing in micro transit. Augusta, when I say Augusta, I mean Augusta, Richmond County, because we are a consolidated city county. And we have some parts of the county which are rural and served by Richmond Transit. But then we have an urbanized area which has been growing. Parts of the urbanized area which are more than 3/4 of a mile away from a fixed route. So persons living in that part of the urban area are somewhat disenfranchised because they're too far away from a fixed route, but they cannot be served by a rural route. And so as a stopgap measure, we are investing in microtransit to be able to serve these potential riders. We hope that we will have service in place next year. We are going with the software as a service approach. We will purchase the software from a microtransit vendor, and the city will provide the vehicles, and our contractor will have the staff to operate those vehicles. We are also investing in some run cutting and scheduling software that will allow us to make some modifications to our current fixed route. Unfortunately, in Augusta, the fixed route structure has not changed along with the change in residential and industrial location. We have somewhat a mismatch between where people want to go to where the jobs and where people are living as to where the transit network is. So having the software will allow us hopefully to bring industry and residential areas within a better reach of the transit fixed route network.
I was just going to pick up on a couple of things real quickly, and not to cut you off, but Dan started asking this question before Sean rudely cut him off. So I mentioned that we operate an express bus network, which is, as you would guess, highly dependent on office workers. And so we are operating now at 30-ish% ridership as compared to pre-pandemic levels, because these folks who might use our service are not commuting to work as much as they might have before. And so we are about to undertake a return to ridership effort, which I think more or less means we're going to be looking at how we can encourage people to get back on the buses, even on those days they are commuting. If it's not 5 days a week, it's 2 days a week. That we still have a service you can ride. But in addition to that, we will eventually be probably later this year, early next, undertaking a concept of operations analysis that will begin looking at the microtransit stuff as well. But part of what we do in our regional coordination role is to provide local technical assistance. And so we've helped Forsyth County and Henry County both through county-based transit master plans, and are about to do the same thing for Rockdale County and Douglas County. And the two that we finished have so far have talked about microtransit as a important tool in their toolbox, and I expect that we'll see the same thing in Rockdale and Douglas as well, just given the nature of those counties. So this concept of operations that we'll be looking at is thinking through how we might be able to support the implementation of microtransit at a regional scale, which could just mean us having some sort of contract that local governments can use to have access to it, but doing it in a way that doesn't tie the microtransit service strictly to a geopolitical boundary, and you begin to think about how you can serve areas across jurisdictional boundaries, whether it's through a microtransit service or an express bus service or a local bus service or a rail service, right? So how do we stitch the region together in an effective way with all of these options?
Hey, I'm Andrew with Arcadis. And Cain kind of got impatient and started answering my question before I asked it, but I'll still ask it anyway to see, what you guys additionally have to say. But, my question was going to be what in your guys' mind, and really all of you, I know I'm kind of more experienced within Metro Atlanta, but I'm sure for all of you, what just social and societal shifts and changes you think need to happen to get people more in the habit of utilizing the transit that we have, and whether, I know in Atlanta, there's always a discussion of just, is it build it and they'll come, and if we had a more comprehensive system, people would start using it more, but then, is that the case right now? What can we do to increase that? I know you alluded to the kind of post-COVID shift there, and I know you talked a lot about the micro-mobility, but love to hear what else you guys have to say.
I'm going to take a little bit of a different cut at that. So here's what I see as the challenge. We've always got to be looking at how to places where they need and want to go. And we've got to be sure that we're designing a system that always can reliably do that. And when transit becomes that very reliable, trusted partner, and it's always a trip you can take with confidence, and it's a comfortable trip, it's a safe trip, and all those kinds of things, then transit does become a part of the fabric of the transportation network. What I think is our other challenge right now, though, is it's not just the ridership coming back, but that reliability factor is very much impacted right now by workforce development issues. I know everyone's having a difficult time hiring, but hiring for operators is a completely different ballgame in a post-COVID world. And on our side, what we have to deal with is it's not just a matter of where we recruit and who we recruit and how we recruit, although all those things are in play too, that all the transit operators are participate in unions, and the unions' business models may have also been recognizing, the drivers, we have drivers that have been with us for 40 years, 30 years, 20 years. I'm sure MARTA does as well. I'm sure Augusta does as well. And so, but recruiting folks in this workforce development scenario we have now, you're not going to get them with the stuff that was appealing to the folks that have been with us 40, 30, 20 years. So you've got to think differently about what is that, and then how do we engage it, and then how is the union that represents transit workers across the country, including in the state of Georgia, how do we engage them as a part of that partnership to make sure that they support the kinds of new things forward to help bring that workforce in, because we're not going to be able to be reliable if we don't have a workforce to support the services.
In Augusta, we have similar needs. Reliability is key. Unfortunately, we have headways that are around 60 minutes, so that doesn't make transit very attractive. We also have the perception that transit is only for the poor. Many other cities problems, so that has to change by investing in new vehicles, increasing the frequency. Getting bus operators is a challenge. We have an old bus fleet, and we have several retired bus operators who retired to Augusta, who've been driving in New York and Boston, and who would drive a bus, but when they see how old our buses are, they say, well, why would I drive your old bus when I was driving in New York in a newer bus? That doesn't make sense. So also in Augusta Richmond County, we have to also show that transit is a partner in industrial and economic development. We have many businesses coming to Augusta Richmond County which locate far away from the transit, but then they want workers who do not have cars to get to the business, to the jobs. And when they come to transit and say, well, can you bring a bus to us? But that's not possible in the short term. So if we could become involved in discussions with developers and multifamily housing developments at the conception stage, I think that will allow us to grow as Augusta grows. So we do have a few challenges right now, but reliability is key. Frequency is key. That will bring people back to use transit.
One other thing I wanted to tag on to what you said that's important as well is we're working with the city of Savannah right now. You mentioned being able to be in coordination with development, absolutely key. And whether that's development of the nature where it's some major business that's bringing thousands of jobs, but the workers are going to come from a county over, and how do you address that need, and how can transit be a part of that economic development solution? But it's also about what we're doing right now with the city of Savannah, which is working with them in their development code to look at how can we be a routine part of reviewing site plans so that transit stops and shelters, amenities, and infrastructure and technology can be developments so that it's part and parcel. And then if it's already there from the day that you move in there, you'll use it, not shoehorned in later.
I'll just add too that, I mean, if there was an easy formula, we would have figured it out by now, and it's complex, and each service property has different needs and issues. So the rider experience is certainly really important. The easier you can make it and take thinking out of the equation, the better off you are. We're working on a regional initiative spearheaded by the ATL, but led by MARTA, the Alternative Fare Collection 2.0, to update the fare collection. Not only technology, but also policy will be another component of that in our region to make it as seamless as possible. And how can we integrate it into other aspects of one's journey, so it's not just about the bus or the rail, but it's about a journey, it's about an experience. And that goes to the importance about how you experience your undoubtedly perceptions that people have about safety and comfort on systems, with some of the challenges that we have with mental health and substance abuse, and also with the rising cost of housing, how that's displacing more people out of housing, and they're ending up being housed on the system informally. And so how do people feel about that? Cleanliness about our stations. I mean, we at MARTA really pushing to improve the cleanliness of our station. So that's on a day-to-day basis, but also we're embarking upon a $1 billion capital program to update and modernize our stations, which were built about 40 years ago, some of which have grass growing through the platform. So they're well past time to be improved. So it's a very multifaceted view that we have toward what can we do to make transit attractive and for everybody, whether you need to use it, or you want to use it, or you can choose to, and you can hopefully make the choice that day to use the system and make it as it can be.
I would just add one thing to that, and I don't think a lot of folks realize that in all but a handful of Georgia's 159 counties, there is some form of transit. Typically, that in the more rural counties, that's a demand response system, a human service transportation system, but that still is public transportation. And so, thinking about how those systems are funded, how they're supported, and how they serve the needs of their populations, is something I think that we should probably spend a little more time talking to our legislators about.
Bus. Yeah, exactly. I know.
So now get on board.
Eagerly anticipated question of all time. I don't know if it's going to be that good. So it struck me when listening to y'all's bios, especially Faye, Cain, and Manjeet, y'all are fairly new in your roles and at your agencies, but Dr. Page, I think this is relevant for you as well. I mean, just in general, what have you learned being in your roles? What's kind of surprised you? What excites you? You know, what do you envision moving forward? So it's a four-parter question, by the way. So no, yeah, what have you learned? What excites you? What's your vision moving forward?
I can start with that one. So MARTA is unusual in major transit agencies in that we have an equal level of effort going forward to advance state of good repair, as we are a legacy system as of 40 years ago, and also expansion because of the growth that's coming to our region. Usually an agency is tackling one or the other, but not both at the same time, and we need to tackle both at the same time. And what's heartening is that there's interest and support to fix up our system. I mentioned the $1 billion effort to rehabilitate our train stations. We have 38 of them. And also to expand. There's a lot of interest in new rail and new bus rapid transit. And for those who want rail but there's interest in actually looking at BRT that's well designed because it can be delivered faster and you can get more supporting stuff done with it. As they're in the Atlanta region, especially coming from outside the region, I'm dismayed to see the lack of sidewalks and other pedestrian and rolling infrastructure that's really helpful to make for great places, but also to bring people to transit safely. So there's a lot of interest in investing in it and making the connection between economic development and transit and what that can do. And it transcends the demographics and the socioeconomics of our region. We have people in the more affluent areas of our region who want transit extensions as much as those who are more accustomed to having transit in their service area. So that's really heartening, and that there's the IIJA that's providing the additional funding to help move these things along faster. Hopefully inflation doesn't consume it all over the next 5 years and we get that under control. As the cost of these projects is definitely much, much higher than was expected. I'd say that just seeing that, and then this is again my third transit agency, is that people see transit investment as an investment in quality of life and economic development and in advancing equity as well as improving our climate.
I've forgotten all but two parts of your question. Okay, good. So this is the first time I've worked for the state. And so I've been at this about 2 years now with the state, and it has been really interesting for me to understand how the state functions as an administrative entity. So I've learned a lot about how policy is set at the state level and how funding flows at the state level and how you seek out funding at the state level. I mean, it's all been very interesting to me, and probably a good conversation for a beer rather than from the stage, right? But I've appreciated learning all those things, and honestly find it kind of exciting, kind of challenging, kind of daunting all at the same time. I am excited. Sort of that for the first time in the state's history, there is a dedicated funding source for transit. And the state has begun to, I think, recognize the need in a very formal policy and funding way. And it's not a lot of money, right? I mean, right now we're bringing in $14 million a year or so in rideshare fees. So it's relatively small in comparison to the balance of the money the state spends on transportation broadly defined. But I do think it's significant. And I hope that we can find a way to grow that investment. That's what excites me.
So, Chatham Area Transit had 3 chief executive officers in, I think it was 6 years before I came. So there's been a lot of change and certainty in the system and leadership. And that ends up impacting everything, operations and management. I work for a board. I'm a, I work for an independent board authority. So I don't work for local government per se. And so of those 9 members, my focus walking in the door was to rebuild the confidence of a board and rebuild the confidence of a team and reorganize a team into a performance-driven organization. So that's what I've spent the last 5 months really focused on. Those are rather daunting challenges, frankly. When we're talking about all these other things about, well, how many electric buses do you have, and what are you doing with, some of these cool things that we're talking about. But I've really been focused on, those kinds of things. And, I think overall right now it's going very well. I think we've accomplished a lot in 5 months. What I'm really excited about, besides our future and what I think is remarkable, as I told you, we've got 3 business lines right now. I'd like to add a 4th to that. In terms of we have a lot of economic activity that's occurring in our vicinity. And back to those home-based work trips, I think that there's a real opportunity for us to expand into express bus, commuter bus market as a 4th business line, to be able to meet those needs and demands and to grow our service in a sustainable way. And then lastly, the thing that I'm most excited about right now is I mentioned to you that right now we're doing a comprehensive operational analysis transit development plan, which is very much route focused. It's very a nuts and bolts kind of a thing. But we didn't have, in addition to some of the other challenges that were before us organizationally, we had no master transit plan. So we had lots of things going on, but how all those things fit together and where are we really trying to get to as a community and how do we bring everybody to the table? So we reached out, and on our master transit plan, it's being funded in part by federal dollars, but our funding partnership is through the Savannah Economic Development Authority, the Savannah Airport, Chatham County, and the city of Savannah. So that kind of a robust public-private partnership and ourselves that we're bringing to the table is starting to bring a whole different, I think, brand to what we do and how we do it. And so I'm incredibly excited about what the next 5 years is going to hold for Chatham Area Transit.
As for Augusta Transit, as to what excites me, transit agencies are willing to share information on best practice. There's no need for a small agency like us to go it alone. If with the battery electric buses, we reached out to several other agencies to ask them what real-world experience they had, and that allowed us to pick our partner, Gillig. One of the challenges that I face on a day-to-day basis is the fact that sometimes science and data to drive your decisions may not be seen by politicians as the right way of doing things. Sometimes we are a city department, so we are competing with other city departments for funding from the general fund. Sometimes we have politicians who say, you know, their community wants a bus stop here, bus shelter here, but that bus shelter is used by 1 or 2 persons per week. There are other locations that are more heavily used that require a bus shelter, and we have a plan of where to place bus shelters. But because a politician has asked for a bus shelter in their constituency, we give them that. So coming up with empirical data to show why we do things the way we do, sometimes it's challenging to convince the politicians we're doing this because of X, Y, Z. So also I'm coming from a research background, so everything is number crunching, and I try to do number crunching to help guide our decisions, but you know, sometimes it's just very challenging. And unlike Atlanta, you have counties who want to be part of a consolidated operating area. We have next door to us an Amazon fulfillment center in another county where there are many hundreds of people who are coming from Augusta, Richmond County, but we cannot provide a transit services to the fulfillment center because the county does not want public transit to fulfill that need. So the people who work there from our county have to use private cars, ride sharing and things like that. So that is a challenge that we have in trying to expand our services into neighboring counties when those counties do not want public transit from Augusta, Richmond County coming into their county based on perceptions, you know, all these type of things. So those are some of the challenges that I face in my position. But it's going to be a long process, but I'm sure in time we will get some wins. I think when people see these sparkling new battery electric buses, then they will say, well, I want to ride the bus now, because that did happen when we had some demonstration buses. People were riding the buses just to experience riding on an electric bus.
Drew. Drew Ressler, Cobb County. Y'all have spoken all about perceptions and some of the challenges, particularly coming out of the pandemic. Another topic related to perceptions, and Manjeet, I know you've spoken about MARTAs into BRT and having some of those corridors come out. As many of y'all have heard, I'm sure there's those transit supporters, quote unquote, that will say it's not really transit unless it runs on rails. And then those transit detractors that say, if it has the word bus in it, I'm not interested. And so just looking through perceptions related to BRT, where we've seen a lot of the same capacity advantages without some of the same cost constraints of rail, how have y'all worked through some of the perception related to BRT and helping the public to, really to socialize BRT so that they can understand what it is that we're talking about as transit providers?
Well, that's a great question, Drew. You know, that if it's not rail, you're not real is an issue we run into everywhere. And it is that misperception of what BRT is versus, say, the bus. And it's not line the bus. I mean, MARTA's bus system moves more people than our rail system. And people don't realize that, but it doesn't get the attention or the same type of investment that the rail does. So with BRT, what we find is that it's a process of is describing what it is, sharing imagery and videos from other places where it's been deployed successfully. And really the messages that resonate is that it is very much like rail, except for it's, as you said, it's a lot faster to deliver, it's a lot cheaper, and you can also provide all these other amenities to make it even better that you wouldn't do if you had to spend all the money on rail. So it's permanence is a key message, that it's not just a stick in the ground, that in the future, our sticks in the ground will have bus route numbers on them, unlike MARTA's current signage, but it's an actual station. It's permanent. So it signals to the private sector when you're talking about revitalization and investment, that there's something that's worth taking the risk, because clearly the public sector is spending a lot of money if they're building stations, that it has the attributes like rail, so level boarding. On the architectural design of the stations is attractive, that it's not just utilitarian minimalist design, but there's actually something that's contextually appropriate for the corridor, as well as one that you can replicate elsewhere for branding purposes, and also to be cost effective. And that it moves basically the same speed as the rail too, with transit signal priority, that you have appropriately located, spaced stations. And the other thing you can do with it is you can have in an area like Atlanta, which is relatively low density for an urban area, you can bring in buses from multiple different routes onto what becomes a trunk line. Fort Collins, Colorado, for its MAX BRT through the center of town. There are other buses that use that BRT corridor. And so that's one of the beauties of BRT that's hard to do with rail, because then you're building tracks from all over the place. Well, you can send buses that have similar design standards down the BRT corridor and really leverage your investment there. So it's really about the permanence and it has the amenities and the features that are like rail, but that you can get it faster and you can do more stuff with the same amount of money. And that really starts to resonate. You saw that with the Campbellton Community Investment Corridor that our board just approved last week. When we first made that as a recommendation at the staff level, there was, as some of you know, there was a freak out in the Atlanta area. And once we explained more about it and showed that with the level of investment, we could do more stuff for the same amount of money, when it came to our board decision, it was a very easy decision to make, and we had a lot of support for it. So demonstrated that's something that can be done, and we look forward to working with Cobb County on being a technical advisor for your work.
One of the things, if you're interested in BRT too, and this is for anybody, is if you, it's been in the ground for a while now, but the Helpline in Cleveland is really a remarkable BRT system in terms of, one, the densities of the corridor that runs along on Euclid Avenue are remarkably similar to the densities that you see in many of the counties in the Atlanta region, suburban counties. So very similar densities that it serves. But the thing that was remarkable about it is it starts out in the downtown, it runs out to the suburbs, and there's if you look at that, Case Western Reserve University and the Cleveland Clinic were both, hence the name Helpline, were key partners in that. But there's also a gentleman there, I think he's still there, his name's Ari Marin. He's a third generation Cleveland developer. And the kind of corridor development that he did, both in terms of business incubators and retail restaurant space that drew people in. One of the things that we learned when we were visiting up there, and this has been some number of years ago, about Cleveland, was Cleveland has the second largest number of theater seats in the country behind Broadway in New York. And it was remarkable to watch people riding the BRT, because you saw folks who were going to the theater, because the theaters were right there on the BRT line. You saw people who were jumping off to go to class. You saw people who were going to, folks with their scrubs on, medical folks, going to Cleveland Clinic. You saw folks, families on there, and you saw people jumping off to go get a bite to eat along the foodie alley, foodie corridor, food network corridor development that they did associated with that. So that's a really good one to look at, to sort of see level, to what you were talking about. It's off-board fare collection, level platform boarding, feels very train-like, seems very train-like, but it's a bus, and it was running both centerline and curbside, depending on, again, there was a bit of flexibility in there to be able to enable that transit investment to serve the development potential and the economic potential that was also resident in that corridor. So those are good examples to look at, I think.
I knew you guys would come through with the questions, and it's been great. We've got just about 5 minutes left. So we want to be respectful of, it's been a full day, and everybody's looking forward to dinner, so we got about 5 minutes to go.
How you doing, Raul from GDOT? I see that we've sort of had a lot of discussion on what each agency is doing individually for their individual metro areas. I know recently there have been a few studies maybe approved to investigate the feasibility of connecting some of these metropolitan areas together. So I wonder sort of what are you guys' thoughts and hopes for getting interconnectivity between Atlanta, Savannah, Augusta, Macon, and then also connecting us throughout the Southeast through maybe high-speed passenger rail and things like that.
GDOT is asking that question? That's no, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not maligning GDOT. I do think it is a big question, but it's encouraging to hear anybody raise it, right? I mean, GDOT just won a $8 million earmark out of Congress basically to look at the line between Atlanta and Savannah. And they're organizing that rapidly and I think working already with locals along the route to start thinking about what the neat implications are for that project. Where do you work in GDOT? Are you in intermodal or? Okay. You might want to take a look at the state rail plan. It's a very good document. It talks about freight and passenger rail. I think GDOT has a brighter outlook on passenger rail than I've seen from GDOT in quite some time. So I think it's great. I do think that it's a challenge. Intercity passenger rail has proved challenging all across the country. Amtrak is routinely challenged by funding and lack of funding and by lack of ridership, right? So I mean, I don't. It's not an easy question, but I think it's certainly something we need to continue to look at. But I also wouldn't just focus on rail, right? There's also intercity bus, and there's a number of private providers who provide intercity bus service. And for a while, the state supported them through some federal grants as well. So I mean, it's an important connecting mechanism as well.
Tracy Lehman just had a quick question. I think we can probably end on this, but wondering if you had to identify a skill set or a thing. Well, yeah, we can let Carly go too. Sorry, I'm thinking looking at the time, but if we had to pick one skill set that you think is most important, maybe that other regions are doing better, that we as consultants here in Georgia could build upon, what would you think is most important for us to focus on?
Technical skill set or any kind of skill set?
Really from the consulting side, so a technical or planning skill set.
I think every single thing we do is built upon communication. And if you are ineffective communicators, it makes all the technical work not as valuable. So I think that everybody's biggest skill to hone and to focus on is communication, internal, external, how you translate between folks who don't have the technical backgrounds versus those who do. But communication is the single most important skill that any of us can have.
I would build on that. And I think as consultants, it's important to be able to relate to the communities that you serve. And by relating, it means, from my perspective.
Dan, real quickly, before we go to Carlene, the last thing I would say on that is that I traditionally in the state, there have not been that many firms who have a substantial amount of transit expertise in-house. And so I would just encourage you all, as you think about the work you pursue, making sure you have the staff to choose that work.
Engineers are not the only transit professionals. I did a doctorate in civil engineering, but my focus was on transportation planning. I'm not an engineer, and I did feel disadvantaged because I could never become a chartered engineer because I came from an economics geography background. So just because you are not an engineer does not mean that you cannot be a successful transportation professional. And sometimes consultants send a whole team of engineers be the best group of persons to do the project at hand.
The reason I also said communication is the most important skills. It's not just about coming in and telling us what your solutions are, but it's about coming in and listening. Communication, I mean, listening is the most important communication skill, and listening to what we're saying the problems are, we'll get much better solutions.
Okay, so this is not an easy question, but I'll just ask for your high-level thoughts, and happy to discuss further offline if that makes sense. But just building on the questions of kind of rail, I feel like, you know, there have been a lot of studies and plans where rail is on the books or planned long-term. Some of those efforts may or may not have stalled out, likely due to, you know, costs and rising costs at that. But I guess, you know, with so many things changing in the last several years, including, you know, lower ridership, but population boom, and some of these other factors, including the recent federal funding that's coming down, do you feel like rail, and I mean commuter rail, heavy rail, intercity rail, high-speed rail, all of it, are we seeing that maybe as being more feasible in the future, or is that kind of becoming less and less within reach for a lot of the metros and other areas in Georgia?
Do you want to answer that, Mark? I don't know. I mean, rail's expensive. It depends on how much money you want to raise at a local level to pay to build rail, right? I mean, and what your priorities are at a local level. Heavy rail's just really expensive. Light rail is also really expensive in comparison to BRT. I mean, Manjeet was talking about that earlier. I mean, I think it just comes down to your local priorities.
I think people are also really tired of hearing about plans and studies. And what they really want is for all of us to come make a difference in their lives. They want us to address their everyday problems and get them to the places that they need and want to go. And so you have to think about what kind of projects can get you to that the fastest, because folks are, you know, they're in sort of an immediate, you know, need immediately help me kind of environment. And I think it's really important that we get to the point we start delivering stuff. We have got to deliver stuff and make people's lives better and different.
Very good. Okay, I didn't steer you wrong. Told you this would be a tremendous session, and I think that with these the experience that we have here, that the transit in the state of Georgia that's looking pretty good is in very good hands. So can we have a round of applause for Manjeet, Cain, Faye, and Oliver? Thank you. And they've agreed to stick around if you have a question, to little one-on-one time. They're more than happy to continue the discussion. So thank you, everybody, for your participation.